Welcome back to a brand new episode of the MMA Beat. It is Thursday, August 6, 2015. Hello again, everyone. I'm Ariel Helwani in New York City. We're going three deep today. Unfortunately, the man in the hat is away for a wedding. I believe he's in Cleveland, Ohio. Beautiful Cleveland, Ohio. So you know what? We thought the show must go on, as always. That's what they say in show business, and this is pretty much as close to show business as we're ever going to get. And there's a lot to discuss, of course. We've been off for the last 2 weeks. So, sorry, man in the hat. We got to do the show.
Also, sorry that you're in Cleveland.
Yeah. Anyhow, here we are, three deep on this week's episode of the show. You know this man, that is Luke Thomas of SiriusXM Fight Club and MMAfighting.com, and that is Jeff Wagenheim of SportsIllustrated.com. All right, guys, as predicted, much to discuss. What a week it has been. Wow. Ronda Rousey, of course, winning at UFC 190, knocking out Bethe Correia, 34 seconds. That's just part of the story here. What has transpired leading up to UFC 190 and, of course, afterwards, as far as her star exploding isn't even the right word. I mean, it's unfair to say exploding. There's a bigger word than exploding. I can't think of it right now. What has happened to her and everyone who covers the sport and what we feel as journalists and all that is just nothing short of amazing, fascinating, all that stuff. Why do you think this is happening now? Was it something about this fight? You know, the fact that it happened in early August, quiet time, the sports. Why has Ronda Rousey taken a whole new leap in her career after this?
Man, it's truly amazing. We were talking about this, all of us, before the show, just about our reflections on it. First of all, I just want to say, commercially, she has some work to do. But this is bigger than Lesnar. You know, I was well aware of all Lesnar's reach. He didn't have any reach like this. Again, she has to sell a lot more pay-per-view buys before she's on that. But I just want to tell, we always talk about the Lesnar era. Lesnar era wasn't like this. It just wasn't. You didn't see Bill Simmons talking about, maybe he talked about Lesnar a little bit for 100. I think he had Dave Meltzer on his podcast. But anyway, long story short, I don't know is the answer because the Zingano fight was big. It sold really well. I think about roughly 600,000 pay-per-view buys, which is a total hit. But I think going into this fight, we had all kind of assumed it'll also be a hit, but it's in Brazil. Bethe Correia is the easiest opponent she's ever faced. Yeah, there's some trash talk. Like I said, it'll do well, but nothing. But I don't know. Either it was WrestleMania. I'm sure that helped. It was some of the movies she starred in more recently. That helped. Someone told me this, and I think it's true. I think that the stuff she said at the ESPYs about Mayweather sent her into overdrive as a pop culture phenomenon, as a sporting icon, as a feminist icon. I really think that when Mayweather leaves, she will be your new king and queen, so to speak, of combat sports, because it ain't Canelo Alvarez, I can tell you that. Somewhere between there and here, you can argue about the signposts, she just hit into overdrive, man, and it is at a level now that is shocking to see.
Yeah, I think all the things you say are all contributing to it, but it's like there's some kind of mystical part of this that it's like greater than the sum of its parts somehow. I will admit freely that I completely missed the boat on this. Leading up to the fight on the weekend, I was looking at this as just the biggest mismatch that she's ever faced, maybe the biggest title fight mismatch in UFC history. And almost like as though, well, Bethe Correia, they're trying to build something up with all the trash talk, but she's really just a placekeeper for the next destination. And man, that was wrong. And in so many ways. It was obviously the fight was the mismatch that we all expected it to be, but in terms of people wanting to pay attention, when I wrote a preview of this for SI.com, the first thing I said was this is a mismatch. That doesn't necessarily mean you shouldn't watch it, but it's a decision between you and your wallet, whether you want to spend $60 to watch what is essentially a one-person show. And I think I even probably pissed you off because I mentioned, what if LeBron were playing the Knicks? Would you still go, even though the Knicks are, not competitive? You probably, no, you would. You would, right? Yeah, you would. But the point was that this was not a fight. This was not, two great fighters going at it. This was just one person stepping onto the center of the stage. And was that going to be enough to get people to pay attention? Sure was.
Yeah. This was a showcase, man. This you know what this felt like to me? Because I've covered some boxing fights for SB Nation. Felt like a big boxing fight. Because if you watch boxing at all, if you're a hardcore fan, if you're Scott Christ, who runs our boxing site, Bad Left Hook, when you're being sold something. And if you look at some of Mayweather's past fights in the past few years, and some of Pacquiao's fights, you go back and look at the odds. Pacquiao, was like a minus 500, minus 600, this huge favorite over, pick anyone, Cotto, whoever, whatever, Claudia. And yet, HBO would find a way to kind of sell it to you. And everyone at the gym would be like, hey, man, who you taking? Pacquiao's the favorite. Like, they would actually talk to you about it like it was competitive when it was never competitive. I had people coming up to me at my MMA gym saying things like, dude, Correia's undefeated. Correia, like, this girl can pack a punch. Like, all they know is Ronda Rousey and what they're being told about Ronda Rousey's opposition, and that is enough for them. It's a brilliant salesmanship job, really, and it reminds me of the same dynamic I feel, because people don't watch boxing, but they know Mayweather, they know Pacquiao, tell me about their opponents, and if I should buy the fight. That's it.
One of the most underrated parts of Ronda Rousey's game, if you will, is her ability to promote fights. She does it better than anyone in the UFC, and you can make a case even better than Conor McGregor. Why? Because she always builds up her opponent, builds her up. She never said one disparaging thing about Bethe Correia. We all knew that she was not even close to Rousey's level, Bethe Correia, but she would always say she's undefeated. She insulted my friends. She talked about my family. She's finished. She was always building her up, leading us up until July 31st to think, all right, is this lady crazy enough to maybe pull off this upset? And then, right when it's over, she's not putting down Miesha Tate. She's not saying I beat her twice. She's not saying I'm on a whole other level like her team is doing. She's like, well, she's seen me twice, so it's a new challenge now, and I got to figure this out. She's seen, you know what I mean? So she's so smart at promoting. She gets it. She truly does. So on top of all of that, what's most interesting to me is that this defied logic. Typically, an international show doesn't generate this kind of interest. Typically, an underdog versus a favorite, the disparity there in the line was the greatest of all time for a UFC main event. That doesn't generate this kind of interest. So what was it? Was it just the fact that people are starting to finally jump on the Ronda bandwagon? Because what I find also interesting is that in MMA circles, among the people who actually cover the sport, no one was saying that, okay, after this, what are we going to do with Ronda? Are there any challenges left? Who's she going to fight next? Is this bad for the UFC? It's all the mainstream media who is finally jumping on this bandwagon, starting to worry about this stuff. We're just enjoying the ride. She's 12-0. This is unprecedented stuff. It's unprecedented to see a woman go into a combat sport and annihilate her competition. This is a fun thing to witness. And we can let the other people worry about that, the other mainstream media, and we'll get to that in a second. But I think all of us are just kind of like, this is refreshing. This is great.
What's crazy? She appeals to people on so many different levels.
Yeah.
Like for us, she's our undefeated bantamweight champion that we have a responsibility to cover, so she covers that. She's a human interest story, a former Olympian who was, fell out of love with judo but found another way to have a career, and so there's that story. And she's a more of a human interest story, someone whose father was, she tragically lost, and but also like
and the movie star.
And the movie star, yeah. So there's that level as well. And she's a spokesperson, so there's that level as well. And then that do nothing bitch speech she made before, you laugh, dude. That thing got like a couple million views on YouTube. My sister reposted it. Huh. Like she is a legit. And I'm no feminist scholar, but it seems to me a fairly non-controversial statement to say she's not just a sporting icon for men and women, because we always talk about her affecting little girls too, but she's a feminist icon completely.
She's a pioneer.
And that too.
Yes.
But she's a pioneer in addition to being
100%.
I've never seen someone who has tentacles everywhere on so many different ways to touch the human experience. She's got it, man.
Yeah, it's crazy. And look at how, in a way, mishandled Saturday night was, and still how it came out
all
roses. It was 1:30 in the morning before she started fighting.
Yeah, that was, it was really interesting to see people who don't watch UFC pay-per-views complain about this, right?
It was
welcome to our world.
I watch 1:30 in the morning after watching, after seeing two tough fights where I'd never even heard of the two guys who were fighting, and I cover the sport, and then seeing a couple of guys who were sure they're legends in the co-main, but this is it was old timers night. Finally, it was 125 when Joan Jett started singing. It was 128 when Buffer finally introduced Rousey, and it was 130 when the fight was over. And that's just not the way it should be. I mean, to me, that's mishandling a promotion. That would be promotional something or other. You would know the.
I don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah, you know.
So you think it would have been even bigger had she fought at 11 p.m. Eastern time?
I have no idea, because again, I think this is all beyond the scope of logic. I think that, look at how it blew up, and it happened at 1:30 in the morning. I don't know whether that means that if they had done this during normal time, 11 o'clock at night, it would have been bigger, or whether it's just beyond reason.
Yeah, the point is, like, it succeeded in spite of all the things you're talking about the overmatched opposition, about it being in Brazil. And for folks who don't know, the reason why international pay-per-views don't do well, Canada notwithstanding, of course. I mean North America, outside North America, is because it's hard to get the press to go down there. You know,
there are only 2 North American outlets there, us and MMA Junkie.
That's it, really? Yeah. Wow. I mean, that shows you. But Ronda's reach is ridiculous to get people to buy a pay-per-view when she can't even go do the car wash at ESPN or do whatever. Just pick it, and the media can't fly to Chicago or Las Vegas or. I've never seen anything like it. I really have never seen anything like it.
And then this complaint that, there's not enough challenges, I don't even think that's a big issue right now. I think the world is finally starting to, recognize her, that we can ride this wave. Like, look, the Miesha Tate fight, the third fight for us hardcores, I don't think that there's a huge interest in that. We've been there, done that. We've seen it twice. It's like, how different is it really going to be? I think everyone will agree that she's on a different level. But I think for the rest of the world, it's all fresh. This is their first time going through this. So the UFC can ride this wave for a long time, and I actually think that she can get even bigger. She can get so much bigger on so many fronts. As you mentioned, her tentacles reach in different areas. I believe, and I want to get your take on this, I believe that for Reebok, now hear me out, for Reebok, not for the UFC, not for the fighters, for Reebok, the Reebok deal was worth it for the amount of money that they spent, let's say $70 million, just to have their logo on her alone. Her alone. She is worth that much, because now you have all of these young women, people like to work out, people who now want to aspire to be kickboxers, fighters, people who go do yoga, wanting to dress and act like, Ronda Rousey, the anti-do-nothing bitch, right? She's that influential. You know what I mean? I don't foresee a young Irishman going out to buy Conor McGregor shoes or shirt because he wants to be like Conor. I can foresee him trying to dress like him and wear a 3-piece suit. I can foresee a lot of young women wanting to dress and act like Ronda Rousey. And how are they going to do that? By buying Reebok. So I think the Reebok deal right now, 6 months in, was worth it for them just to be affiliated with her. Crazy statement?
No, although in 10 or 5 years, I want to do a story on all the women who were inspired by Ronda Rousey, who'd never done athletics or MMA before and tried MMA and got KTFO'd. Just a separate little...
Even women going to the gym.
Yeah, no, I know what you mean. Like, I think you're right, because if you look at other figures, what was Durant's deal? Was it something like, I don't know, 300 million for 10 years? Something. So, like, even if you excluded all the other ones, if that was just Rousey's deal, that would still make a lot of financial sense. So, sure, I mean, it's, boy, they got quite a bargain, didn't they?
Yeah. And the matchmaking means nothing now. That's the bottom line for Ronda Rousey. They could not make a bigger. There's not a woman in the 135-pound division who would be, somewhere within the realm of a contender who would be a bigger mismatch. I mean, obviously they can get the people who I lost to, who are lower down. But I mean, someone who's like a top 10 level person, it doesn't matter. They can just pick and choose anybody they want. They don't have to build somebody who can challenge her, because it's been shown that they can just put anybody in there with her and she carries the show.
So do you guys like the idea of putting her as the co-main event of McGregor-Aldo, or should she be on her own show?
I don't think there's really a wrong answer. I think you can make a compelling case for either one. For me personally, and again, if someone disagrees, I would never argue too much about it. I would just say, for me, when the UFC says we can have a McGregor-Aldo show and then a terrible undercard, or we can do a Ronda Rousey separate event and a terrible undercard, and they will both sell well. And they would be right. They would be absolutely right. I would just like to see them put it together, because when they do that, you just make, that's the way you grab a fan and keep them for life.
Yeah.
Is those 189 type events, man, where you have, yes, a major headliner, but then there's something else. And I know Rory and Robbie got overshadowed. It sort of lived up to things and it became something different. But to have that kind of star power all aligned, and then you have the international appeal of Jose Aldo and Conor McGregor, and then the worldwide global superstar that is Ronda, plus attracting, single-handedly closing the gender gap. I just feel like you would be bringing the world together a little bit. All eyes on combat sports, make a moment for history. You don't have to, but man, it sure would be nice.
Yeah, the pay-per-view buys might not add up if you put them together to what they would be separately. But if you think about the venue that you're going to hold it in, I know that Dana White floated out the idea of the AT&T Stadium down in Dallas. Well, they can fit 5,000 people in that building, and so they would have to have a hell of a card in order to get a reasonable sized crowd in there. And so putting those two fights together, and with maybe even another title fight or another really good fight or two in there, would do it. And that would do what you're talking about. That would make it into something that's bigger than just we're gonna sell X amount of pay-per-views. We're gonna then sell X amount of pay-per-views. It just changes the whole way of doing things. And I think that's what we're seeing now. We're starting to see that it's not just business as usual. There are certain people, and when CM Punk finally comes into the cage, I think the same kind of thing is going to happen. He's going to bring a whole. It doesn't matter who he ends up fighting. He's going to bring a huge amount of interest with him just because of who he is, not because of whether he can fight or not, but because of who he is. And Ronda Rousey, she does it all by herself.
I'm really curious to see the pay-per-view number for this show, because we could talk about the Reebok stuff, we could talk about her book sales, her movie, all that, but does it translate into pay-per-view buys? That's really the big unknown at this point, because in this day and age, it's a lot harder to get 1 million pay-per-view buys as it was, in 2009, 2010. Can she be the one to do it? At this point, if the numbers are correct, and I trust who reports them, it's typically our colleague Dave Meltzer, but the UFC doesn't confirm them, so you never know. She hasn't been close to 1 million, right?
600,000 though is I think anything above 500,000, you have someone on your hands that, given the right circumstances, they can do big numbers. I would say that for sure.
600 was
the Zingano fight.
184 was 600.
Yeah.
Really? Because I thought up until this point her most was 175, which was coupled with a Chris Weidman title fight against Lyoto Machida. If she did 600 for 184...
Maybe I'm wrong, but I think that's right.
So I think this could do a lot more than that, and I think the next one could do a lot more than that. Is the right place for it AT&T Stadium? I'm wondering if we are going to couple this with Conor and Aldo, if the Irish people, who are a big part of this equation, right, are they going to go to Arlington, Texas?
It would be amazing to see even one champion in a stadium in Dallas.
But is it the
when
right
is the last
call?
time Dallas has ever seen a champion?
Oh, wow. Well done.
I endorse that.
But is that
as a Washington, D.C. resident, I endorse it.
Will people travel there?
I think so. And you know what, man? There was no more instructive look, I think the UFC is actually not good at making super fights, which is why it slipped through their fingers over and over and over again. And we can get to that discussion later on. But one thing they are good at is making sure they take care of their fans. And that is something boxing is the opposite at. Boxing is not great at making super fights, but they're a little bit better about it, the boxing promoters, but they're terrible about taking care of their fans. And so when I was at Mayweather-Pacquiao, it was the most bizarre crowd, not a fight fan in there, not one fight fan, true blue, hardcore fight fan. People were telling us that when Mayweather fought Hatton, it was kind of like Conor McGregor. The Brits came over from Liverpool and drank the MGM Grand dry of beer. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
Those are rock-ribbed fight fans. If you go to a place like Dallas Cowboy Stadium with the right kind of card, with the right kind of promotion, which we know they can do, you can at least set the price point for people to have an experience that they'll remember forever. I truly believe that. And I know I've many criticisms of the UFC, but I do think they take care of their fans for the most part. And that is a chance for people to witness history where Mayweather-Pacquiao, it was just tickets to the highest bidder. It was a joke.
So 189 had a $7 million gate, right? A little bit above that. Could this card do more than that? Because you have to sell a lot more tickets to get there.
I think MMA fans are kind of confused. Boxing has routinely hit, in the teens. Or I was at Canelo Mayweather. That was 20 million. You don't think you can get 20 million out of Dallas Cowboy Stadium? I bet you can. I bet you exactly you can.
And especially now that we think about it, because you mentioned super fights. That's taking two champions together and having them fight each other. Really, the ultimate kind of fight we can have. Well, we're learning now that we don't necessarily need to have these two amazing fighters against each other. We just witnessed Ronda Rousey fighting against a huge underdog. Before that, we had Conor McGregor fighting against a guy who was one of the top guys in his division, but Mendes was fighting on almost no notice. So we essentially had two straight fights in which neither one would be even in the same ballpark as what we would call a super fight, and yet they both performed as though they were. And so maybe we're using old-time thinking with our whole talk about super fights, and the new way of looking at it is find your star and put them in against somebody who is just going to make that star shine more brightly.
But that's the pride mentality.
Yeah.
I mean, that's why Fedor was like, well, Fedor lost. Everyone was like, they wagged their finger. Fedor beating up on a bunch of cans I mean, I'm sorry, that's what boxing does too. Tune-up fights work because it makes a guy look good, and then you can sell a big fight.
What I love about this story so much is that it's so anti-MMA. Like MMA, for the longest time, has been about affliction shirts, tap-out shirts. It's like, I hate to use, it's kind of a douchey sport, right? Alpha male type sport. I mean, it's like there's a lot about this culture that was not very admirable. And I hear you have a woman coming in, right? And doing it in the most alpha male type of sport, and doing it kind of in an alpha male type of way, like going out there, that look on her face, I mean, it's terrifying to see what she does, and knocking people out. She's not even submitting them anymore, she's actually knocking them out. In a sport that I've said, regardless of all its faults, has actually been rather progressive when it comes to equality, men and women. Maybe the pay isn't quite the same and some of the opportunities, but like, you know, no one really scoffs at the fact that Claudia Gadelha versus Jessica Aguilar was on pay-per-view. No one says like, oh, this is subpar. But if they, you know, if ABC put on a double header between, you know, the Liberty and the Lynx, followed by the Lakers and the Bulls, people would be like, why are you throwing out a WNBA game first? You know what I mean?
Yeah,
the way
but,
fans and media...
there's a difference. To me, it reminds. I'm sorry, I'm spitting on everywhere. To me, it reminds me of tennis. Right? So if you took away the men's side of the game at Wimbledon, look, Serena Williams is a star.
Yeah.
People are going to come see Serena Williams. But I am saying, I think having the men and women together, it raises, a rising tide lifts all boats. And so everyone shines on each other and the whole thing works. I think that's exactly what's happening with UFC in the way that you know, a couple women on the card, a couple men on the card, and everyone has a good time.
And it doesn't have to be the next one, but I'd love to see them capitalize on this and couple her with Joanna Jędrzejczyk. You know, a main event, co-main event featuring 2 women champions in 2016 for UFC is pretty amazing stuff, and I don't think a lot of us could have predicted that would actually sell, right?
Yeah, and we were also starting to see a turn in, I think, the attitude about women's fighting in general. I think there was a time when Gina Carano was on top of the game, and certainly when Cyborg was just, you know, brutalizing people, when there were a lot of people who I would be sitting and watching fights with who would, even fight fans, even people who watch men's MMA, who would look at it and say, oh, I just don't feel like watching, I can't watch women punching each other, I can't watch women doing that. Yeah. Now, with Rousey, particularly until this fight where she you know, scored a one-punch knockout, you know, she was doing it in a much less, you know, what we'll say brutal way, I guess, you know, just twisting your arm and making you submit. So she created some appeal. But there's, I think, in general, just the idea that we can look at Ronda Rousey and say that she is, you know, certainly an SI. I know you've argued against that, but we have her as the top pound-for-pound fighter in the game. And even if she's not pound-for-pound number one in your estimation, she's certainly among them. And that's a really big advancement. You know, you were talking earlier about this, the idea of her as a feminist icon. The other day I was on Facebook and I was reading some stuff that a friend of mine posted who's a real big feminist, and she wasn't posting about Rousey, but she was posting about that story that happened, I don't know, a couple months ago where Leslie Smith was at a club with some other woman and some guy grabbed her friend's butt and she beat him up, and she was posting this as a you know, woman's empowerment. Isn't it great that she didn't have to have some big guy next to her to defend her, but she could defend herself and beat down some guy. So there's, you know, this idea that women's MMA has gone from being sort of, well, I don't think it's I get a little queasy watching it, to, you know, right on, woman, you know, go for it. That's a pretty cool thing.
So you bring up Cyborg, and my stance on this has actually changed over the last few days because we've been hearing about this potential fight essentially since 2012. Like, since Rousey became a champion, I think everyone wanted to see this fight, I'd say, because she talked about her and all that. But I feel like now that she is being viewed by so many more people and is this fresh face in the sports world, they actually have bought themselves some time. Like before, if she was just always here, you know, a big deal in our world and somewhat of a breakthrough star, the time was now. I mean, how long are we going to talk about this damn thing? But now that it seems like all these people, like LeBron James, Kobe, all these people are talking about her, you can get away with the Misha fight. You can actually build this into an even bigger fight. I don't feel the same kind of sense of urgency as I did even 6 months ago. Crazy?
No, I think that's right on. I think that's temporary, right? Because
maybe 1 or 2 more fights.
Yeah, like, because, and the funny thing about it is you can get away with Misha. Not only can you get away with it, you're going to kill it with Misha. Yeah. Casual fans were coming up to me being like, I think, you know, did you see Misha striking at the Fox event? And I'm thinking, oh man, well, okay, you know, I guess they want to see it. But neither here nor there. I did a couple of radio interviews after the Monday or whatever, and I got the same question from everyone, being like, you know, okay, Ronda Rousey is amazing, she's great, but why should I buy a fight if I can just get on Facebook a minute later and I can see her fight, you know, wrapped up in an Instagram video or whatever? And my response is, for now, people want to live in the moment. They want to be a witness to greatness. Okay, but they are right that as that phenomenon wanes, where it's like, okay, Rousey's going to whack some other person, they're going to that pressure to then make the Cyborg fight, I think, will be significantly increased. But we're talking, you have another year or two.
It's still a novelty, though.
It's a complete novelty. So for now, they can completely surf on whatever, to your point, whatever kind of matchmaking they want and just do gangbusters business.
Yeah, I agree. I'm thinking it could be something that never happens. Not that I wouldn't want it to happen.
To my point, UFC has a very bad track record when it comes to making.
Although you see her
also
out there on SportsCenter now with the UFC logo, they're obviously pushing this.
We'll see. The UFC's interest, obviously, they could sell some significant pay-per-views. So that short-term gain is not to be overlooked. But think about it if they're looking at it more long-term. What if Cyborg beats Ronda Rousey? You think that she has a future as a 135-pound fighter? Really, and they don't have a 145-pound division. There's just a lot of. It doesn't really serve the UFC's interest long-term to make that fight. It certainly serves it on a one-time event basis. And frankly, I think that the more I've seen Ronda Rousey fight, the more I think that she's going to win that fight anyway. But if it didn't go her way, I don't know.
There is. Okay, let me be unequivocally clear about this. If Ronda Rousey doesn't want to fight Cyborg, that is entirely her prerogative. She does not have to. This whole argument about it'll affect her legacy, I don't buy that at all. Mm-hmm. George St. Pierre didn't want to go up and fight Anderson Silva. Ronda Rousey is under no one's obligation to go up and fight Cyborg. She does not have to. If she wants to be the queen of her division, even if everyone's overmatched, that's the beginning and the end of the argument. But for me, that is it. This whole thing about there being a weight issue, if you believe that weight is the real reason they can't make this fight, you are playing yourself. You are buying into talking points that have nothing to do with reality. And the other argument about what if Rousey lost? What if Rousey lost? I like Rousey's chances to win 1 of 3 fights, number one. She's a bigger favorite over Cyborg than Hughes was over Gracie. Just understand that for just a second. Number two, it would be the worst thing in the world to have another woman star you could then trot out on pay-per-view. And people saying, what division is she going to fight in? Who cares? Give her some 145-pound fights in the UFC until she's done and then be done with it. Or give her catchweight fights against Tate and Zingano. She doesn't have that much time left in the sport anyway. The arguments to do this fight are so overwhelming, except for Rousey doesn't have to do it, and if she doesn't want to, that's fine.
So
but understand, that is it.
So why do you think it hasn't happened?
Look, they're trying to negotiate to get the right weight and maybe to get Cyborg down. I understand why the UFC goes out and says those things. They're trying to negotiate something that makes sense for all the parties involved and themselves included. I understand that. I'm just saying, you as a consumer out there, if you think this is about weight, like why this fight can't be made, you are playing yourself. It does not.
What does better on pay-per-view right now? McGregor, Aldo, Rousey, Cyborg.
Jesus. Right now, McGregor Aldo, but promoted properly with time, I think Rousey Cyborg can be the biggest fight in MMA history.
Wow. I would go the other way. I would say that Rousey Cyborg would do better just because Ronda Rousey is just the biggest star, and this would be the one time where they could sell a competitive fight. They could sell it. Now the caveat to that is that they're always selling it as a competitive fight. They tried to sell Betchka Hay as a competitive fight, and probably a lot of people who didn't know the difference. So maybe that's wrong, but I just look at this as the one fight that they could really sell. I do think though that the weight stuff is an issue. If they do insist on Cyborg coming down to 135,
it's not. Here's what I would say: it's not an issue not to make the fight. It's just not. It's just not. The only way you can not make this fight is to say Rousey doesn't want to, and I'm cool with that. Champion is under no obligation to answer to me. It's like, it doesn't exist. It's what she wants to do, right? Sure. That's the beginning and the end of it. Okay. But to say, well, there's a weight complicating factor, it's not a real obstacle. And the other part is people like, well, look, she's a sitting champion. Why does she have to leave her weight class? Again, the argument about her prerogative notwithstanding. The UFC went and revealed in your interview, the UFC went and recruited a pro wrestler with 0 fighting experience. You mean to tell me they can't fudge things a little bit when it makes sense for them? Yeah, right. And everyone was like, well, Matt Hughes fighting Royce Gracie, that was a much more manageable task. Number one, he was less of a favorite. Number two, what if he had torn his ACL shooting in, tried to fight through it, and got submitted? What were you going to do with Matt Hughes then? And then, by the way, when BJ Penn was a lightweight and then went up to welterweight, and then after losing to George St. Pierre and then coming back to lightweight, what happened to his pay-per-view buys? Oh, I know. They shot through the roof. Yeah. There is no argument to not do the fight except for Rousey's prerogative. Fact, end of story.
Disagrees.
I don't know. I don't think it's about Rousey. I think it's about the UFC. I really do.
Maybe so.
In terms of what?
I think that the UFC in the short term makes a big score with it, but I think it's a big risk for them. I think it's a big risk for them in the long term.
Are we in the image protection business or the fight business?
Oh, we're not. But that's what the UFC kind of is.
I don't understand why people are so insecure about Rousey's chances. Look at the odds maker.
Oh, well, that's a whole other story.
Look,
that's a whole other story.
I don't know what's going to happen. Cyborg has a huge punch. You know, obviously, also, if they go to 135, I think that's a different fight than if it's at 140 or even 145. I can agree to that as well. But I like Rousey's chances no matter what. To me, when people are like, well, what happens if she loses? Why is everyone so insecure about Rousey? She is a star. People lose in this sport all the time and come back. It's not the end of the world.
In MMA in particular, losses don't mean as much, in my opinion. Like, look at Randy Couture, BJ Penn, double-digit losses.
Look at Kimbo Slice. Kimbo Slice is drawing 3 million people at age 100, whatever he is.
Do you think that the UFC is afraid that she's going to lose and they'll be stuck in the Cyborg business?
I don't know that they're really afraid of it. I agree that I think that Rousey would be the favorite, and I certainly would pick her to win. But I think that if there's an obstacle, that's the obstacle to me, not Ronda Rousey. I think Ronda Rousey would fight Cyborg right now. She could come in this room and she would fight her. I think that it's the UFC that's trying to finagle the stuff. They're the ones that are like, well, we have a 135-pound weight class, which I agree with you is total nonsense. But if they insist on Cyborg coming down 135 and we get a depleted Cyborg, is that really the fight we want? I mean, really, the 140-pound fight is the fight that should be made. But I think it's the UFC, not Ronda Rousey, that is kind of balking at it.
And again, and I'm okay with that. If Ronda says you took PEDs, then that's why you weigh that much, and that's why you can't get down, end of argument. End of argument. But if the argument is, well, you know, she needs to get down to 135 because we can't do it at 140, it's total non-starter. It's no truth to it whatsoever. Yeah. There is literally historical precedent for it. She is a bigger favorite. There is, I mean, talk about the biggest fight you can ever make, and it's with women in combat sports. Sorry, I cannot accept it at all.
It's such a fun fight to discuss. I feel like this is, I love saying, the classic barbershop fight. I feel like men can sit in a barbershop and debate this.
Or women in the beauty salon.
Of course, great point, great point. And debate this for hours. We could talk about it for an hour, but let's move on because a lot of other things happened this week. It was such a WSOF kind of night on Saturday, right? Because there they were putting on the best fight in their short history. Like, let's not sit here and say they've been around for 20 years, but...
You mean the Nurmagomedov-Diaz beer fight?
Well, that was an added bonus. Shields Palhares is such a great fight because it's the only fight that really, WSOF or Bellator, you can make the case that Bellator is included in this discussion as well. It's the only fight that either promotion can say, here we have 2 top 10 fighters main eventing our show. This is a fight that would main event a UFC fight night. No questions asked, right? Palhares is so dangerous on the ground. He's been doing all kinds of controversial stuff, which helps, you know, his selling power. Against Shields, who's great on the ground. It was just a fascinating matchup. And they put it out on the same night as Ronda Rousey, which makes absolutely no sense. But they don't deserve that blame. Let's be clear. That's NBC's fault. That's them just plugging WSOF wherever they need to be plugged in. So what happens? A brawl between Nurmagomedov and the Diaz brothers, and all of a sudden on social media, people are talking about this thing in the middle of 190, and then, you know, Palhares with the eye pokes and holding on, and Mazzagatti and all this, and the punch afterwards, and all of a sudden, come Sunday morning, we're talking Rousey, we're celebrating it, we're digesting it, the traffic is out of control, but we're also talking about WSOF. So was Saturday night a bad night for WSOF, or was it actually, you know, kind of a victory for them?
I think it was a great night for them.
Okay.
I'm
happy someone said it.
I mean, look, when I can see his face, the heel hook that Palhares held too long and got him cut. Yes.
Mike Pierce.
Mike Pierce, yes. Yeah. Jeez, he's been gone so long. I forgot.
Hasn't fought since.
Yeah, exactly. When he did that, UFC was like, "You're done. You know, you're gone." When Nate Marquardt botched the TRT thing, I mean, they brought him back eventually, but he was like, "You're never going to fight in the UFC." And then they got Charlie Brenneman to fight Rick Story. Everyone knows, like when UFC wants you gone, they just let you go. Like it's that because they have no power. To me, the fact that they stripped the title of him, okay, but to me they haven't cut Palhares is like. I hate to say it, if I'm in their position, I understand why they haven't cut him because no one draws headlines for that organization like that guy does.
Biggest villain in the sport, arguably.
Biggest villain in the sport. And people, we're at a point now where people want to...
Steve Mazzagatti.
Right. But that was just an added bonus because...
Yeah, that just made this that much better.
I mean, the eye pokes could have led to a point deduction. Who knows? But I'm just saying, for me, I'm not saying that people who want him gone from the sport don't have a claim. I think he should be suspended for at least a couple of years for what he did. But I can see why there's a little bit of hesitation on their part to be like, you know what? People hate this guy. They want to see him lose. And Jake Shields before the fight kind of got slept on a little bit, being like, I'm gonna hold a submission too long on him. It was the perfect storm.
Yeah. What'd you make of their decision to suspend him indefinitely and more importantly, at least for right now, strip him of his belt?
I don't know that the belt is for them. It's about making fights that people want to watch.
Sure.
And I don't know that the belt is all that big of a deal. But it was just I just think that they needed to do something just to perpetuate the headlines. Really, I mean they had all the headlines from on Saturday night. I mean it was kind of comical. I told you guys before, and I was on vacation. I was up on the northern coast of Maine and out in the woods in a tree house at my wife's cousin's place, and I'm sitting there with my laptop open watching the stream of the UFC fights, but every once in a while checking Twitter because I couldn't get the WSOF. And I'm reading. I think it was Sean O'Shadi was there for you guys, and I'm reading his stuff, and I'm like, oh my God, I wish I could. And I'm hearing about the brawl in the stands. Then I hear about how Shields has just defended defended a heel hook or defended some submission, and then and all this stuff, and then all of a sudden that ending, and I eventually did watch it last night, but what a headline grabber that they had there. But I think that they did the right thing ultimately. They had to have some kind of they had to at least show some force, but I agree with you. They can't really get rid of the guy.
Oh my God, Bellator would sign him in a second if they were free.
This is it. The promoters who are sub-UFC, so Bellator, World Series of Fighting, they just have a different moral calculation about how they go through business.
Yep.
Everyone's like, I'm so upset with Bellator for signing these guys who should be retired. Let's say something like Koscheck or something like that. And I don't know how you argue with that, except to say I can entirely see why those promotions, to make some kind of an impact, would just have a different moral calculation about what they're willing to tolerate.
Who wants to go out there and fight? I mean, Jake Shields is a beast on the ground, and he was defending everything.
You wouldn't watch that rematch right now? Like, give me that rematch tomorrow.
I would watch Shields, but other guys are like, are they going to want to test themselves? And I mean, Shields came out of it. It looked like he was unscathed. He got out of there before.
Except for his eyeballs.
Well, that part of it, no.
And that's the big selling point. If he doesn't get raked in the eyes multiple times, does he win that fight? Right. And I know you brought this up. It's unfortunate because that submission, arguably the submission of the year, like that reversal into the Kimura, is beautiful stuff. The guy is incredibly talented. Yeah. And this is all part of his brilliance, if you want to call it that, because he is the most hated man because not only is he dirty, not only does he hold on to holds, not only does he do things that he holds on to the cage as well, but he's damn good. He is incredibly good.
My co-host on the SiriusXM Fight Club, RJ Clifford, has argued that he's the best submission fighter in MMA. Man,
better than Ronda?
I think it's all debatable.
You can make an argument,
but I mean, he's in the conversation for sure.
100%.
Dude, that Kimura, when you go back and watch it, do me a favor, go back and look at his right foot. He is pressing so hard into Shields, his heel is off the mat. I'm talking the most minute details of perfection he got. He just needed to let it go a little bit earlier, but he can't because he's that guy.
And forget about the actual technique. He did that to Jake Shields, who might be the most underrated, toughest guy in the history of MMA. Like, you look at who Jake Shields has fought and defeated.
Jake Shields is a warrior.
You don't do that to Jake Shields. Yeah. You simply don't do that to Jake Shields.
Look what Jake Shields gave to Demian Maia. Yeah. We're talking one of the best guys in the world. And Demian Maia had his hands full with that guy. Lombard, he couldn't do it. But I think Shields is like, you always watch Shields' striking, and you always think the big punch is about to land, and it never lands. It never lands on the guy. He's an incredible fighter.
And even when Shields was on top of him for most of that fight, I mean, sure, there was the eye gouging that was warned and missed and all that. But he also landed some nasty elbows from the bottom, and he was always threatening for something. I mean, it was, you know, until that last moment. I mean, until he held out that submission too long, it was like, man, this guy is really something else. I mean, as much as you kind of hate him for what he's done in the past, he's a beast down there. But I just don't know, man. And other than Shields is going to want a piece of him, but who wants to fight that guy?
It was disturbing to watch because you could see it happening a mile away. You could see him holding on. I mean, something's happened as of late where you have to wonder if everything's in order up there, because the more we talk about it, the more he's doing it. You know what I mean? Like,
he's always been doing that.
But not this many times in a row. Like every single World Series of Fighting fight, I think it's 3 now that he's had, he's been doing it. Like the UFC, he would do one here and then not do it. He's doing it every single time now. A. B, the Mazzagatti factor. You knew that this was going to just make things worse. When Big John told me in Brazil that Mazzagatti was the ref for that fight, I truly thought he was joking. But again, Nevada, you got to give him somewhat of a pass because Herb Dean and Big John were in Rio, so they didn't have the best. It also speaks to the fact that like there are 3 people, I think, in MMA as far as refs are concerned that we actually trust, which is kind of sad. Like the commissions and the promotions to a degree, if they're going to be on
There's a few more than that.
Yeah. You know what I mean? But like for a Rousimar Palhares fight, I want Big John or Herb. That's it.
Yeah.
I don't want anyone else.
Well, you
right?
also need somebody.
They're the most consistent, and even they're not consistent all the time.
I'd be okay with a Robert Hines or a Jason Herzog. I like those guys.
I know Jason was working. Fair enough. Where were those guys? Right. So now the spotlight is on Nevada because World Series has suspended him indefinitely, essentially saying we want to see what they're going to do, because if they're going to ban him or suspend him for 2 years, then what the hell does our suspension mean, right? We could just follow suit. The commission always supersedes the promotion. So the spotlight is on them for 2 reasons. A, what are they going to do to Rousimar? And I want to know what you would do if you're, Nevada. And B, are they finally going to revoke Mazzagatti's license? I mean, I don't even want him refereeing amateur fights. If you've been doing this for as long as he's been doing it, and you still don't know how to properly ref one of these fights, then what are you doing? You're a part-time referee. He's a fireman. He's a very nice guy. I've met him and I've interviewed him. You're ruining full-time fighters' lives, and you have to cut him loose. And so I think that if they don't do that, I think they lose a lot of credibility, because we've seen their shows as of late. They've done some good, but they've also done a lot of posturing and a lot of theatrics and a lot of like, we're gonna shove it down your throat, Chael Sonnen, and do all the kinds of stuff. If they don't point the finger at themselves here, because they're the ones who appointed him, then what are they doing? If they don't police themselves, then what are they doing? And how do they handle this situation? So do you agree with the revoking of the license? Is that too harsh? And what do you do to Palhares? If you're in charge, if you're the executive director, what do you do with this man?
Look, I understand why World Series of Fighting has to let him go, but the guy's just a menace. He's a menace.
You ban him for life?
No, I give him a 2-year ban.
Okay.
Because he's in his early 30s, so that's still a pretty hefty. Right. You can go make your money doing seminars, but I think that's a pretty severe punishment. Ban for life, I just can't see. But if you ban him for 2 years and then he comes back and does it again, sure, you ban him for life at that point. And then for Mazzagatti, I only saw the ending like on a Vine, and I was like, okay, Mazzagatti's positioning wasn't great, but I didn't see what was so bad. Then I'm back and watched the whole fight and all of the eye pokes and I think it's after the second round, Shields gets up in his face and goes, "What the F are you doing?
Yeah.
Do something here." Like pleading with him to make an impact. So to me, if you don't revoke his license, you certainly don't put him on a pro show anytime soon. You can do, more.
How many times is he going to miss these things, though?
Right, but you don't have to have.
One of the things, he wasn't missing all ball. He was warning him, and at one point he said, "If you do that again, I'm going to have to deduct a point." And
After
then
the 4th time,
and then he did it again, and it wasn't a point.
Right.
And then Shields said something to me, and he went over and talked to him, and he still didn't deduct a point. So I mean, at a certain point, if you say, but in Mazzagatti's defense, I've seen other refs do this where it's not so much with not eye gouging, not something like that, but I've seen with like fence grabbing. Don't grab the fence. Don't grab the fence again.
I agree.
Don't grab the fence.
But you can make the case that 2 eye gouges should be a DQ. 1 eye gouge. I mean, it's absolutely illegal.
If you watch the video, and I DVR'd it, if you watch the video, turn your volume up, you can hear Jake Shields scream in pain from the eye gouge.
It's disturbing.
It's super disturbing. So I understand why, if the commission wants to bring on the hammer, I get it. But for Mazzagatti, there just has to be a come to Jesus moment. Like either you're capable of doing this or you are not. And frankly, I think Dana White is sometimes unfair to various figures in the sport. Turns out he was right about this one, I think.
Yeah. All right. Let's move along. Running out of time. I want to ask you guys about this new main event that was announced recently, or at least reported recently by for the UFC 193, Condit versus Lawler. Welterweight title fight, big show for them. It's their debut in Melbourne. And on paper, you see a lot of people say like, wow, this is incredible. I mean, the violence, as everyone loves to talk about, between these two, that will be created between these two, is going to be off the charts, especially what Robbie has been doing as of late, how good Condit looked in his return against Thiago Alves. This is a fun fight. And quite frankly, I think it's a fight we've been sort of talking or dreaming about for the last few years, right? Especially since Robbie went down to 170. But if you actually look at it from a resume perspective and a rankings perspective, if you're Tyron Woodley, and especially Johnny Hendricks, who was promised a title shot and took a fight against Matt Brown for various reasons, you got to be pretty pissed off here, right? The guy just jumped over both of you, who, by the way, beat Carlos Condit not that long ago.
Stopped him.
Yep, and now you guys have to fight each other to determine, I guess, the next number one contender. Do you have a problem with this?
I'm just over it, you know. Like there's so many sporting arguments to make.
Sure.
Right. Would I have preferred to see that handled the way that the rankings would have meted it out? Sure. But at this point, you know, look. Also, they also have regional needs. They need to bring. They were going to go to Melbourne. They wanted to bring a big, exciting show and one that promises action. And they're also going back to Texas. So you have Hendricks versus Woodley that can play well in Texas, not just because Johnny's from there, but because of the collegiate rivalry they had. So it's serving a regional need in that way. But listen, if anyone was like furious about it, I get it. I can't bring myself to care anymore. It's just what it is. It is what it is, Ariel.
Yeah, I feel like I've rung that bell over and over and over and over again, and we've got a light heavyweight title fight featuring one guy who got knocked out. Got knocked out in the fight. He's coming back and doing. And we could go down a list and give you all the fights that really were not, all the matchups where somebody jumped over somebody else or was coming off a loss and gets a title fight. This is what seems to happen now, and I think that we can complain about it. And I will go on record and say this is the wrong matchup in terms of a meritocracy. I think that's pretty clear, but it's a fight that has a lot of appeal. It's a fight that should be a lot of fun to watch. I've seen Lawler and Hendricks already. I wouldn't mind seeing Lawler and Woodley, but I actually am sort of excited to see Hendricks and Woodley. So
do these kinds of title fights, though, change your opinion on the belt? Like, does it make the belt seem less important? Is the belt more of a prop? Because there was a time where I think, legitimate UFC title fight, the belt feels like a real deal thing. It's a prize. It's the same as the NBA title. You want that thing. But now that fights are being booked more for entertainment,
right?
Not always, but the Gustafsson fight that you bring up, this fight, these are entertaining fights.
Rousey Correa? She was ranked. I think she was ranked. She was ranked 10th in our SI ranks. I think the official UFC rankings.
You can give them a pass on that because there really wasn't anyone else, at least right now. But does it make you feel differently about the belt?
Well, this doesn't make me feel differently because I've already felt that way. I've already felt as though I've already felt that the belt was kind of devalued in an empirical sense, and that when John Jones fought Chael Sonnen for the light heavyweight belt. I think that was maybe the first one where I looked at it and said, yeah, this is kind of nonsense that they're making these kind of fights. I don't mind these kind of fights, but when they have the belt, it should mean something. So I guess my new perspective on it is if somebody is somewhere in that top 5 and maybe 3 jumps over 2 to get to number 1, I'll live with it. Look, Frankie Edgar was ranked ahead of Conor McGregor when McGregor was going to get the fight against Aldo. We could go through the list, and it just this happens over and over and over again. So the belt doesn't really necessarily mean the best guy is fighting the next best guy. The belt means the guy who has the belt is fighting somebody else who is a reasonable challenger, and I guess that's devalued in a way.
I'll just say real quickly, for me, it's a tough division. Carlos Condit's a tough fight. You can sort of look at it that way. For me, it's just the body of work. Is this the top contender? No. But he beat Hendricks already. Let's see if he beats Condit. He already beat McDonald. If you can put together a body of work, I think that gives prestige to the title versus, independently this fight over that fight.
Let me ask you about TJ Dillashaw. We didn't have a show after his big win over Renan Barão. He's become a big deal. I mean, of course, he's no Ronda Rousey, he's no Conor as far as drawing power, but very well respected as a champion. I think no one at this point believes that first win over Barão was a fluke. So now here we are moving towards that Dominic Cruz fight, and I mean, to me, there's no fight that interests me more than that fight. I'm interested in Aldo McGregor, don't get me wrong, but I am super interested in Cruz Dillashaw because of the styles matchup and because of the bomb that Cruz laid on my show. I mean, it was just I was in awe of what he was saying because of the way he says it. Like, this guy doesn't just trash talk. He doesn't just say, I'm going to knock you out. He actually breaks it down like an analyst, which makes it so refreshing, different, and interesting to listen to. But what I want to ask you guys about is the whole Duane Ludwig situation, because leading up to that fight, Duane took some shots, I guess if you want to criticize Team Alpha Male, said that TJ's the only one from that team that really wants to be a champion, who does what needs to be done to be a champion. And he has since backtracked to a degree. But even this week, Chad Mendes saying, like, we made Duane, this guy, I'm tired of hearing about all this stuff. Can this whole situation coexist? Or do you foresee a scenario in which TJ Dillashaw actually leaves Team Alpha Male?
You don't think so until, with these team departures, I always see it like, it's quiet right up until it's not, right? A bomb doesn't explode right up until it does. Look at what happened with Alliance, with Miles Jury and Michael Chandler. Yeah. I thought these guys were dyed-in-the-wool Alliance members, man. And Michael Chandler visited the SB Nation offices one time and just waxed poetic about the deepness of his bond with Dominic Cruz. Well, I'm sure that they still do, but it wasn't enough necessarily for him to make a professional business decision to go elsewhere. So for me, there already is a rift. And, I think that Duane's contributions to, I understand that Mendes' point about, look, we were going to beat guys we were going to beat anyway, but I do think that, like, Duane Ludwig was able to have an impact at scale over these guys. But the rift is already there. I mean, if they stay silent, we'll see, The good thing is everyone still loves the people in the middle, right? The two parents still love TJ, and so they're willing to let TJ go to Colorado and then also be a member of Team Alpha Male. But when that dynamic stops existing, then you're going to see the full and complete split.
Yeah, it is an individual sport in the end. I mean, the teammates work together, but guys have to do what each guy has to do what he has to do in order to get better. And this team out in Sacramento is probably the most truly and accurately named team in the sport, Alpha Male. I mean, this is every single sport, every single team in MMA should be called Team Alpha Male, because that's ultimately what these guys are. Every single, you step in the cage, you want to be the Alpha Male. You are the guy who wants to be, to dominate the other person. And you, in preparation for that, of course you're going to say that you bring to the table what it takes to beat somebody else. And if your coach is kind of slagging you, then you're gonna say something back. So I guess it does snowball into something bigger than what it was before. So it doesn't surprise me that once Ludwig left the team, that there was going to be some sniping back and forth a little bit.
I didn't think it would be to this degree, though. Like, I'm starting to wonder when it becomes a distraction. Because if you have a coach training one of your best friends and he's taking shots at the team, and then the team, okay, and then he backtracks, but then the team is taking shots at him and they're openly arguing on Twitter and things like that, how is that not a distraction? How does that not bleed into your relationship?
And Danny Castillo went with him to Colorado, so it's not like he's alone out there. He can still get some good, I'm not saying I predict this, but it wouldn't surprise me that if TJ Dillashaw can get the same kind of wrestling and grappling training and overall some sort of, different components of a fight camp, when he can get that with Duane, plus he already has the striking, what the need for Team Alpha Male becomes redundant, because he can't get the striking training there. We've seen that. As good as Campman is, he has a special bond, right? Those special bonds can't be duplicated. So it's definitely going to be interesting to follow. I'm not saying that they're all going to break up, but it's just too many things in play to be like, this is a sustainable situation.
And you can't blame TJ because he's had so much success. He became a champion with Duane. So he's really in a tough spot. And I think he's handling it very well. He's playing that middleman role very well. I'm curious to see who Alpha Male hires as their new head coach. Martin Kampman leaving. Could this guy be the guy to inspire TJ, I mean, if it's not broke, don't fix it. So, you know,
Yeah,
I don't foresee him
whatever
leaving.
TJ's been doing, whatever he's drinking, he should
Yeah.
keep drinking it because, I mean,
That fight against Dominic, holy moly.
Well, no,
Can't wait to see it.
Whoever they bring in, will TJ have the same kind of rapport with him as the head coach? I mean, I'm sure he'll have a say in who
Yeah.
they ultimately hire. You know, has to work for the whole team. But you know, when you have that kind of closeness for someone who is not just outside of the camp, but in many ways alienated,
Does it drive him away even more?
Why,
Yeah,
why am
that's
I here
weird.
when this new guy's here when I have, you know?
Exactly.
And before we stop on this topic, I just have to say that everybody picked TJ Dillashaw to beat Renan Barão except one knucklehead from Sports Illustrated.
You picked it.
I was
You
the
picked
one
Renan
guy.
Barão?
I was the one
in
guy
the
that
rematch.
went against them, and I am here to. You know, most of the time, people like to bury their bad picks. I'm here to acknowledge that.
Well done.
That was a bad.
Yeah, that was
idea.
dumb.
That was bad. That was,
Okay, let's end on this.
that was dumber than usual.
Last question. It's a prediction.
Yeah.
All right?
Oh no.
Think about it.
Okay.
All right.
A prediction.
Be careful what you say here. Who wins? Ronda Rousey, Floyd Mayweather.
Jeez, now let me think about this.
I wasn't sure if you took me seriously or
Clay
not.
Travis. He won the Giblert Award this week for just the. I mean,
This is the debate
At-
that is raging throughout America.
At being a human, I'll say Ronda Rousey.
Oh, wow. That's a
yeah,
good answer.
Yeah. I just want both of them to fight Clay Travis.
Is
That's
this,
what I would
Is this
like.
the worst byproduct of Ronda? We talked
The Ronda Rousey mainstream sports hot takes.
Yeah.
I mean, they're serving them up, roasting, baby. The steam's coming off those jokers. Isn't
I
it?
love people who say like,
steamer, right?
I watched my first UFC fight, and now all of a sudden they're saying this needs to happen. They can't name another person in the UFC, but this needs to happen.
The Clay Travis article is just, I mean, we're talking about in the pantheon of idiocy will hold a special place, as does he. But I am glad that the mainstream sports world is weighing in on it,
Absolutely.
even if they're fumbling in the dark.
It's
I thought
great.
he was a country
like it.
singer. I didn't realize. Then I figured out.
Clay Travis?
Yeah.
So it sounds like one, doesn't
I
it?
love the idea that the
Yeehaw.
reason this has to happen is because they will make a boatload of money. That's why we should do things in life. You know, like I could think of a lot of things that Ronda can make a lot of money for if she went out and did them, right? I mean, this is the basis of everyone's argument right now. If they fought, and what kind of a twisted mind? I don't know. You know, I don't know the author, but what kind of a twisted mind actually wants to see a man punch a woman? Like, just that idea is weird to me, right?
A knucklehead.
The face-off is weird to me.
Yeah.
The idea that this will generate a lot of money, if that's the basis of your argument, that in itself is flawed and gross. You get what I'm saying?
Yeah.
I don't want to see who's the better fighter between them. I have no interest in seeing that.
Right.
Plus, they also compete in two different sports. There's a reason why top fighters in both sports. Look, that was a joke. That was a curveball. We don't need to break this down. But it's just like, But you're right. The fact that they're talking about it.
In the end, it's better.
That's silly.
And I mentioned this before the air, and I just want to make this point. For years, we have you and me and you do it all the time because you have to pitch your work, and all of us do. But asking the world to take notice of MMA, and they assiduously avoided it, thinking, I don't ever have to walk outside and check the weather. I know what it's going to be. Well, you know what? It's raining now, MFers. It is raining now.
Look at us now. We're the smart ones.
Yeah.
Okay, real prediction. Does Big Nog fight again?
No.
Dana White said he's done. He's now saying he's not done. How about that?
Okay, he's done.
Okay.
UFC just is not going to book him again. They're just not.
All right. We're done. Finally.
Yes.
Good show. Good to be back. We missed you, Chuck. We'll be back next week. By the way, all month long, we're back, right?
Yeah.
All of August.
Yeah. How about that? So for all of
nice.
you who have been complaining that we were off the last 2 shows, we got a lot more coming. Thank you so much for watching. UFC is back this weekend in Nashville. Glover Teixeira against Ovince St. Preux. Then there's a little bit of a lull in the schedule, which might be well received. It's been a really long summer for them. I mean, back to back to back to back. So of course, we'll have plenty to talk about. Looking forward to next week's show. For now, we say goodbye. Thank you so much for watching. That is Luke. That is Jeff. I am Ariel. We'll see you next week. Enjoy the fights.